Liftoff! Welcome to episode 323 of the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me today, as always, is the illustrious, the wonderful Superman, Mr. Andrew Callett.
I'm glad that my mother posthumously is still paying you to say such kind things about me.
Well, you know, we all got to make a living.
That's true. Hello, sir. Good to see you. Although I did just see you 2 days ago at a wedding. So
yes,
it's good to see you again.
It was a good time. Thank you for being there. And
Yeah,
I think
great.
we both concluded that we are way too old for that sort of thing.
It is a young man's game. It appears to be that we are no longer the target demographic of music, culture, sales, influence, anything.
Nothing.
We are irrelevant. We're done.
Yep.
Take us out back behind the shed and shoot us. It's all over.
Anyway, I have to say, in the past couple episodes, I asked people to follow our YouTube channel, and y'all have come out in force, and I just want to say thank you very much for that.
Yes,
and
we appreciate it.
Remind people, if you haven't yet, I would sincerely appreciate it if you did follow our YouTube channel. It's Defensive Podcast. Just search YouTube for Defensive Security Podcast, and you'll find us. I don't think
if you don't like looking at us, if you don't like looking at us, which I can't blame you, you can just turn the screen off.
Well, there's also an audio-only version, so you don't have to.
Which, probably far preferred to most people, but we don't have the fancy graphics. We don't have fancy, so we got to work on that. We need to, maybe. And the other folks who are awesome lately is our Patreon supporters, and we do appreciate that.
Yes.
And maybe if that grows a little more, we can get fancier, because I like to think our value is in our content, not our flashy graphics, but I don't know.
Flashy graphics are pretty important these days, so.
It appears to be the case.
Just to reiterate what you said, thank you to our Patreon donors. And if you do want to be one, you can go to our Patreon site. It's patreon.com/defensivesec. It's also linked on our website. We'll put a link in the show notes. If you do want to become a donor, you actually get the episodes a week ahead of everybody else, which is super exclusive. And, we'll continue to look for additional things like, now that I'm through this, hopefully we can start talking about live streams soon. So that should be fun.
This being your son's wedding.
Sorry, yes. The reason I don't have my normal microphone out is because my condo is kind of packed to the rafters with wedding stuff. So it's been a lot. Let's just say it that way.
But you guys threw a hell of a party, so I think mission accomplished.
It was great. It was awesome. It's so weird having a daughter now. So anyway. Anyhow, getting into, actually, before that, the thoughts and opinions we express on the show are ours, not those of our employers. And with that said, our first story today comes from Krebs on Security, which we have not had a good Krebs story in a long time. This one is actually quite interesting. It made the rounds last week. And the title here is Self-Replicating Worm Hits 180 plus software packages. And it feels like it has been a long time since we've had a good worm. Like how, we used to have WannaCry and NotPetya, and we had, like, for a while there, we had a lot of good worms, and now we do again. This one is very different, though. That unlike what we have seen in the past, this is not all happening in the in the confines of your computer. What's going on here is the attackers apparently phished some initial credentials, like half of the NPM and GitHub devs have fallen victim to lately, and somebody who is a developer on NPM fell victim to this, and that resulted in their code being infected with what was the start of this worm. And the way it works is this code that gets injected, when it runs on a new developer's, an additional developer's system, it looks for npm credentials, and if it finds them, it looks to see what those creds have access to, and assuming it does have access to something, it injects itself into the top 20, the 20 most popular additional npm modules that that developer has access to, and then lather, rinse, repeat.
Indeed.
And what it does once it it does its thing, it actually makes a copy of your repository and makes it public, and that's where it gets its name from, which is the same name as the big sandworm in Dune, which I think is called Shai-Hulud. Is that how you say it? Do you know?
We'll go with that. All I know is the spice must flow.
Fair
He who
enough.
controls the spice controls the universe.
So it was making copies of people's repositories, including their secrets, with a repo name that appends the Shai-Hulud, which is again the name of the giant sandworms from the Dune story. And I think those are published in GitHub, I believe. Anyway, and I think it's also stealing the credentials in some other way. So it's kind of unclear what the end game is, other than just being super obnoxious and exposing people's code and reproducing for the sake of reproducing, just like Jeff Goldblum's Nature Wants to Find a Way. NPM finds a way.
Indeed.
I think is the case.
I don't know if it's just our confirmation bias, but boy, there just seems to be such an uptick in cluster around npm GitHub supply chain attacks against code repos and code, open source code lately. And it's super, super popular, it seems. And it feels like a very lightly defended area, ripe for exploit and attack, with fairly devastating consequences, though we've seen limited thus far. So I don't know if this is the building storm and the bad guys are starting to experiment and figure stuff out. But I really think these major, repo providers probably need to start thinking about, and they're slowly doing it, but how can they harden up so that even though it's not their fault, their reputations are not too badly damaged by this onslaught of problems that's coming against their ecosystem.
100%. As an industry, I think this is like the attractive nuisance from hell. We're one bad attack. I mean, look, so far, I'm not saying these are trivial attacks, and I don't mean to downplay them at all, but in the context of what they could have been, these are not terrible. Like, they're exposing people's source code, and they're causing people to have to recycle their tokens, and perhaps some entities have actually been breached as a result of that stuff being exposed. I don't know. There's no stories about that yet, but it's not hard to imagine that this could be used by some much more malicious actor to publish something that's much more destructive, or what have you. And we just so far it's either been just making code public that was intended to be private, or it's been stealing cryptocurrency. Like, those are the two variants that we're seeing, and I just can't see that it's going to stay confined to those, to that type of attack. It's going to be weaponized in other ways. So I think we're in this foot race to improve our defenses before the next really bad thing happens. And I do think, by the way, if you're a victim of this is probably it's giant pain in the ass.
Yeah, sure.
And I don't mean to downplay that. I also got to
wonder if you've got some very low and slow stealthy stuff going on out there that is...
Well, that's a good point.
...very quietly worming its way through. Because these have been noisy and fairly common in terms of their goals. But, if I'm a nation state or whatever, this might be a very interesting way to slowly build out some backdoors or some monitoring or some other nefarious things that I can sprinkle out there and just let quietly get implemented in all sorts of things. So I don't know. That might be a little too James Bondish for some, but we've seen similar campaigns before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So they interviewed a person named Nicholas Weaver, who made the comment, this is a supply chain attack that conducts a supply chain attack, which I thought was kind of funny. But he goes on to point out that this really highlights the urgent need to move to phishing resistant authentication. And I would also go so far as to say I think we need, and maybe I'm not smart enough to figure out what this would look like, but I feel like the model that we have around API token access is kind of broken. Like, we've proven time and time and time and time again that just having that being secret is not super effective. And for whatever reason, they accidentally including in your source code or being stolen during a build process. There's lots of ways it can happen, but I really think that there's going to have to be a rethink at some point on how this plumbing works.
Yeah, but it's also the challenge of how do I enable my developers or whatnot to work effectively and quickly and not have too much security in the way, which is an interesting problem, especially when a lot of this is automated pipelines and automated capabilities that aren't interactive sessions. So,
Well,
but I think the defaults today are just too loose, and we're going to keep getting bit.
the solution, I mean, to your point, the solution is going to have to be very efficient, right? It's going to have to be as easy or easier than the way things work today. Ideally, somebody finds a way to make it more efficient, to make it easier than the way it works today, and then people will actually want to use it. I think that's the ideal case. But you're right.
We shall see.
Okay, our next story. This comes from a blog, and it's I think his name is Dirk Janum. Dirk. Oh, it's Dirk Jan Mollema. I'm sure I'm butchering that. It appears to be his personal blog. You can find the link to it in our show notes. And this describes a process that he went through preparing to give a Black Hat and DEF CON presentation about some things related to what are called actor tokens in the Azure environment. And so it's kind of an undocumented feature. And so he was building a set of slides and taking screenshots and whatnot, and accidentally realized that these actor tokens, when paired with a specific vulnerability that existed in Azure with their I think it was Azure Active Directory Graph API, that he could actually take over any account in any tenant anywhere in Azure, which is absolutely amazing.
With no logs.
With no logs. And that's the best part about this, is that this actor token model that is intended to be, as best I can describe it, a back-end Azure-only internal service-to-service authentication scheme. And as far as I can tell, it's not really intended to be exposed to customers, which I think is why it's undocumented. Doesn't have any logs. Like, you can't, you can take over any, or you could. It's been fixed now, just to be very clear. It's been fixed. So it was responsibly disclosed. It was Microsoft apparently investigated and concluded that it was not maliciously used in the wild. But this is one of the challenges I think we have with these uber complicated cloud environments, and I speak with authority when I say, like, it's these environments are so ungodly complicated. I'm actually surprised this doesn't happen a lot more often.
Yeah, it felt to me like this is something that probably exists more than we realize. Some sort of back end God mode for these cloud environments for various all sorts of reasons, right? The cloud providers need to have, whether you say it's over or under, the abstracted layer of what we touch to be able to manage all this stuff. So how can they be found and abused? And I feel like this is part of that. And hey, to Microsoft's credit, they fixed it quickly. As far as we know, it hasn't been abused, but it looks like it was very low logging fidelity around abuse of this. So it may be tough to know. But think if you were a foreign intelligence service and you had access to this
Oh my God.
and knew about it for 6 months or a year.
Or a ransomware actor. I mean, like,
Sure.
this is one of those things that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up.
Well, I think if it were ransomware, it would have been found pretty quick. Like it would have been noisy enough. The investigation.
Oh,
went,
agreed.
Wait,
but it could have
Yeah.
enabled like a mass, mass
Yeah.
casualty event, right?
Right. Yeah. Half of the Azure instances all get ransomware at the same time in the world would have been smoke if you got them. I picked the wrong week to quit sniffing glue kind of moment.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's wild. So to your point, I wonder how many more of these are out there. It's super complicated. And, you look at something like Microsoft or any of these, this was a sort of it appeared to be an older version of the service that's been replaced by newer functionality.
Mm-hmm.
How much do they even understand some of the older APIs and protocols and capabilities that are hanging out on the back end of these massive cloud providers?
Yeah,
Oy.
I've been in IT for a long, long time, and I know you have too. And one of the truisms I think is kind of the universal experience is that when a company just deems that something is like not strategic, they put all their effort and knowledge and talent and resources behind the new thing, and they allow the old thing to wither on the vine while they continue to milk it for money until eventually they it crosses some threshold and they decide to shut it off. But in my experience, you often end up in this case where you have something that's running and you don't have the critical mass of talent that still understands how the thing works. I don't have any idea if that happened here, but it's not hard to think that it did, right?
Yeah, I would tend to agree. Who knows, right? It's tough to know. But you're right. Like we don't do care and feeding of stuff that it's no longer mission critical, and then it sneaks up and bites us in ways like this, and it's not great. I'll put it that way.
Not great. That's a good way to put it. Now, we try to obviously give idea, give some suggestions and not just more reasons to wring your hands. But this is not a great response to this. Like, there's nothing that you could, other than looking for something anomalous happening in your tenant that has no logs associated with it.
Right. Right.
There's not a lot that you can do. I would focus my comments more on the cloud providers. Like, this tells me that I think we have to do a much better job of engaging creative red team and pen testers to go and find the crap like this before like, to your point, like the foreign intelligence services find it. And I don't know what to say beyond that. This is not something that you're going to get like a vendor management spreadsheet. I know we make jokes about that a lot. Like, that's not going to find this kind of crap. And by the way, I am quite certain that after this happened, that like people were probably flinging spreadsheets at Google and at
Of course.
IBM and Oracle and
like how many, like some random question from a fairly non-technical auditor of, do you have any back-end tokens that
right.
could
exactly
take over our account without our knowledge? The other thing I will give a little credit to some of these big providers is they do have big internal red teams. And how many of these do they find that we don't know about? Because they don't need to disclose, right? They just quietly find and fix.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll give them a little grace. It's super complicated. It's super tough. And
Yeah, I had,
especially these huge, yeah, you had that.
I worked for a small, I mean, relatively speaking, a small cloud provider, and I had an expansive red team of really talented people. So I'm not saying that they could or couldn't find this sort of thing. They did find some weird stuff. Like, to their credit, they, we did find and fix stuff, all the time. But that's why they were there, right? That's why they had jobs. But anyway, I think this is, more fuel to the fire, and why that is super important. So if I were going to say anything, the question to ask your cloud provider is like, what are you doing to make sure that you're properly performing, in-depth technical testing of your infrastructure? Because you as a customer aren't going to be authorized to perform like deep pen testing on the cloud provider's internal system.
And they answer, we have an extensive red teaming technology system approach that we do XYZ. What does that do for you?
I know.
How do you believe them? I don't disagree, but like, okay.
You're right. No, you're right. You're right. They will.
Unless you're sitting there, I mean, or then you end up litigating their security program on your contractual obligation that may or may not make sense because of the way you do it in your environment. It's like, I hate to say it, but at some point there becomes a matter of trust and reputation. Like, you can ask, you can say, hey, you can ask for certifications and such, which is kind of shorthand for, do you do XYZ? But I don't know. There's just I hate to say it. I've just been in this industry so long. There's so many different ways to answer that question in a very honest, fair way that does not get to the root of the question behind the question.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, I do have to take, a minute to dig on Microsoft, because like, this is not the first time, they have had some problems in their cloud. Like, they have had a history of some problems in their cloud. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't use them. I'm just saying that, hopefully they're taking this as an opportunity to improve their practices, like they did with the big Office 365 breach a few years ago. So anyhow, moving on. This next one comes from the LastPass. So LastPass, the password manager, they have a blog. I didn't realize they had a threat intelligence team. I never thought about like hiring LastPass to come in and do my incident response, but whatever. They have this article here. It's titled "Large Scale Attacks Targeting Macs via GitHub Pages Impersonating Companies to Attempt to Deliver Stealer Malware." So this is I think a pretty fascinating attack, but at its core, it's something that we've talked about quite a few times in recent weeks. It's the file fix or the click fix attack technique, just kind of delivered in a different way. That again, like much of especially when it's an attack on the user, it's just different ways of packaging things that have worked, new packaging on things that have worked in the past. And that's what is happening here. So the way this is working is that the attackers here set up some GitHub Pages accounts, and they spent apparently a lot of effort to do search engine optimization, so that if you were to search for, in this instance, LastPass GitHub macOS, their malicious page would return at the top result. And they actually have a screenshot that shows what that looks like. And so from a user perspective, if you search for that, GitHub has a reputation as being a trusted So, it's not going to be blocked by, it's not going to be blocked by most companies because there's a lot of legitimate stuff on there. But the construction of the page that you land on makes it look like, it is on brand, right? It looks like it's a LastPass official page, and it gives you, it all indications are that it's legit. And then, it has a page on how to install LastPass on your Mac. And of course, it has you copy a command line, like a terminal command, which is base64 encoded. And, it part of the script that you're copying and pasting, and you're asked to copy and paste into your local terminal, reverses that encoding, and then actually downloads the malware, the real malware from another site, which is this atomic. I think it's called Atomic Stealer, which does what you might imagine, stealing passwords and keys, and I'm sure all of your Bitcoin wallets and crap like that. So, but again, it's a yet another play, another novel play on this click fix attack vector that we've been talking about, quite a bit in the past. In the past, it's been like, people coming in through Teams chats or on a telephone, or lots of in an email. There's been quite a few different avenues that this is hitting organizations. But again, if I were thinking about the things that I would want to focus on in something like user awareness training, it would be like, generically, if you're asked to paste stuff into your terminal or command prompt, it's be
But
skeptical.
here's the problem. Let's say you get either super technical people who are comfortable doing this, or very untechnical people who are just following directions. I struggle with this, right? Both of them are likely to potentially be comfortable doing this because either they've done it a bunch and they don't, or they don't know better. They don't know that they shouldn't do better, and they want the tool and they're going to get the tool. In an enterprise environment, Macs are interesting because a lot of folks, there's not nearly as much of an ecosystem of not having local admin rights on Macs as there are on Windows machines in corporate environments. But this is a perfect example of where, if you have an IT department big enough to handle it, don't let people pick and load their own things. Make sure that that's coming from a known, safe source pushed out by IT, and just take away the ability for people to have local admin rights. Now, they'll hate it, right? But it's being used against us so often that I go back to, again, your IT department has to be responsive, big enough, fast enough, provide enough of the right tooling already out there that they're not hobbled by not being able to load their own tools. And then, they can keep it patched and that sort of thing. But there's a lot of caveats to that recommendation of having enough resources to be able to do that effectively, and not everybody in every company can. And this is also targeting individuals as much as it's going after big companies. And the other thing that's frustrating about this is the SEO optimization. Sorry, that's redundant. Getting to the top of the responses in Google and Bing and such as the legitimate hit is an interesting challenge that I still feel that the search engine folks haven't done a good enough job fighting. Same thing with why they haven't done a good enough job blocking ads, and malicious ads, I should say, not just ads, but malicious ads. Why run an ad blocker? If you can promise to me that ad is not malicious, maybe I'll think about it. But they can't do that. We've seen too many malicious attacks come via ads. So I'm sure, like anything, that there's a level of decision making around this that these search engine companies go through. We could probably stop this, but it would disrupt XYZ, cost XYZ, have a less of a user experience, and it's just not worth it. So good luck.
Yeah, I think it works because it is so low touch. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
works is a loose. I say that somewhat tongue in cheek, but they don't. It's I don't know that it's a huge margin business, and so if they add additional friction or a lot of additional labor, I think they kind of make the model less attractive. Not that it's a good model like in general, but it's that it is big business, and so the other is, as you were talking, there's a couple more things occurred to me. Number one is a lot of IT people use Macs, right? It's just my observation. A lot of IT people prefer Mac over Windows. So that's one point. There are legitimate tools, and I'm thinking of like Node.js, which is funny because we talk about npm a lot. Where like the normal installation method of Node.js is you are curling an install script and you're piping it to shell as
Right.
root
So this is very
or as a
similar
user.
to another technical task coming from GitHub. Right. When you go to GitHub, you're primed for this more homebrew manual installation method, not a clean installer, and so your brain's already primed for it. So you're probably more willing to accept those weird directions. Yeah.
I and it's the other thing I was thinking as you were talking is I'm not sure, by the way. I don't know enough about this atomic stealer. I don't know if it actually requires admin rights. Like it might run
Mm.
just fine in the context of a unprivileged user because its
Why don't you
purpose
try it?
is.
Why don't you try it? Let me know.
I don't have a Mac. I know. I don't have a Mac.
No wonder you're unemployed.
It's true. It's
You
true.
can't keep up today with the kids today.
I just can't.
Anyway, I completely killed your train of thought. What were you going to say?
I don't know. Other than the like the happiest day of my life was when my kids were born, and then like the next happiest was when I got married, and then I think the third happiest day of my life was when I got rid of my Mac. Yeah, yeah. Anyway, that's gives you some insight into Jerry. So, so I did love the battery life, though. I'll go there.
Hey, you're also the guy who tried to roll out Linux to a laptop population of what,
52,000
50,000?
people. Yep, and I did it. I did it, and I hated it. Never doing that again. That was a mistake.
Hey, at least you admit it. No wonder you're no longer in leadership at the level you're at because you admit your mistakes. You can't do that when you're at that level, sir.
No, you got to find somebody else to blame. That's true.
Correct.
It's a great point. All right, so moving on to our next story. If I can, speaking of ads, get rid of that screen. Okay, this one is from cybersecuritynews.com, and the title here is FinWise Insider Breach Exposes 700,000 customer records to former employee. So there's a company called America First Finance. It's a financial services company in Texas, and they separated an employee, but not apparently completely. And that former employee was able to, I guess, and this is where it's a little unclear, right? A lot of this is coming out of reporting to one of the attorneys general as part of their breach notice obligations. And what they're saying is that this former employees, their access was terminated, and they did use multi-factor authentication, and that was actually terminated. But apparently, this employee had access to what they call a quote archived service account that was still active. Now, I don't know what that is. I don't know what
Well,
an
it's a service
archived.
account that's been archived, that's still active. It's right there in the name.
When you say it that way, it's it just makes so much more
It's
sense.
it's It's a shame reading comprehension has fallen so much in this country.
It just makes so much more sense when you, when you say it like that. So this former employee was able to use this, this service account, which, despite the name archive, was obviously still active and did not require multi-factor authentication, which, by the way, is not an unusual situation for for a service account. But they were able to use it to run large queries. And there was a funny quote. I got to find it in here. It was something that just, okay, here it is. The company discovered the breach on June 18th, 2025, following anomalous activities flagged by its SIM system, which detected unusually high volumes of data exports encoded in base64 and transferred over SSH tunnels to external IP addresses, which to me means that there is some amount of that they would consider to not be anomalous.
Correct. So now we know this is above the limit.
Sorry.
But hey, good on them for detecting. Good on them for detecting it at all.
Absolutely. It's actually kind of impressive that they did it, because normally this kind of thing is detected after it's up for sale, right?
I'll be honest. I'm guessing it was an AWS. It was probably GuardDuty. If they're running GuardDuty, it probably flagged it, because GuardDuty's good at that kind of thing, somewhat.
Well, we know it was cloud-based. We know there was somewhere in the cloud because it was remotely accessible, and they'd make reference to using, as part of the remediation activities, they make reference to using the AWS KMS as one of their corrective actions. So that's probably quite accurate. But they do say, by the way, that they're implementing just-in-time access for privileged accounts. But even there, I think there's some basic hygiene. Like you need to understand what accounts your people have access to, unless you are able to get to that nirvana of people not ever having access to the passwords of service accounts, which is if you can get there, like, awesome. But a lot of people can't, because there's a lot of applications that just don't support that level of automation. But if you can't, like, you've got to understand who has access to what. There's got to be some inventory of that, and you need to. And this is like the most boring, unsexy part of. It's like patching. Like, who wants to patch, right? Like, when somebody leaves, you've got to, revoke all of the access they had.
Well, in this case, if it was a service account that had a static password,
yeah,
who changes their service accounts when people leave?
Well, not them.
Right. I don't think many companies do. I think service accounts are one of those, like, it's funny because you see NHI, non-human identities, being thrown around by certain vendors, which to me, as an old school guy, that means an alien. NHI is non-human intelligence, and they're coming for us.
Oh, well.
They're already here.
They are already
Trust
here.
no one. Anyway, service accounts are a special kind of hell, I think, for identity management. And the way I've tried to look at it is, how can I figure out when something that shouldn't be using the service account is using the service account? Like some sort of interactive user from a different location, from a different IP address, from a different time. If it's a service account supposed to be doing one specific thing, how can I spot anything different? And then I will know if somebody does it. Because the problem is, and again, the password shouldn't be laying around. They should be vaulted in some way, or in a password manager in some way, and you should know who gets access to it. But the problem is, let's say you have some sort of engineer leave who had access to those static passwords because it's a non-interactive login.
Mm-hmm.
Are you going to rotate them all of your hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of service accounts every time somebody leaves? That's a tall order, man.
In Jerry's world, yes.
Once again, I see why you're unemployed.
No, that was something I took a hard line on. Like and it
No, I
happens, and it was difficult. But
I don't disagree. This is
the
tough.
the other thing I would say is, like, if it is that painful to change, those passwords, and I'm not disputing that it can be painful, but I would, my counter to that is, I think organizations really need to build a capability for those things to be rotated much less
Sure.
painfully, right?
Yeah.
Now, it's
Build in
easy
that
to say in
expectation from
hindsight,
yeah.
and certainly easier to do when you're building something new and have that kind of forethought. But um, there are so many, in my experience, there are so many different kinds of situations that occur, not just this case, so many different types of situations that can occur that would necessitate this. And a lot of them, when it happens, it's crap is on fire, and you
Right.
gotta you gotta you gotta act fast. And if part of your calculus is, well, like, it's gonna take us, like, if we start now, we can get done in November. Like, that's not a great it's not a
Yeah.
great situation.
So what you're saying is build in a methodology, a functionality, a capability to rotate Surface accounts easily and automatically on a regular
Yes,
basis.
yes, that's
Makes sense.
that's my view.
And not when you're in the middle of a crisis. I'm not sure when that happens, but I'm told it happens.
I remember there was like a weekend where everything was not on fire.
Hmm. That doesn't seem right. I think you just didn't know
But
where the
I,
fire
I, I
was.
have a feeling like it was on fire. I just hadn't been called in yet.
Yeah, that makes more sense. Sorry. I'm still in the middle of an incident at work, so I'm still a little
I
extra
know.
cynical right now.
I know.
It's getting better slowly.
So
That's
our
all I could say.
next story comes from Ars Technica, and the title here is "How Weak Passwords and Other Failings Led to a Catastrophic Breach of Ascension." So this is a follow up to, I think we talked about it at the time. There's this organization, for those of you who are not aware, called Ascension Healthcare. They had a major breach, and that breach caused a lot of problems. It caused delays in healthcare, and it exposed, untold numbers of patient records, and it was just, generally bad all the way around. And it came up again because a senator, U.S. senator, um, in the spirit of kicking Microsoft while they're down, uh, you sent an angry letter to the FTC, like they're going to do anything today, uh, saying that, Microsoft, they really need to be looking at Microsoft, because Microsoft is creating, and this is Jerry paraphrasing, right? They're creating kind of a dangerous situation by continuing to support Kerberos authentication, which has been abused and was abused in the case of this Ascension Healthcare breach, uh, to enable bad actors to kind of roam the roam around in a victim organization. And so there's some more details that came out, at least new details for me that came out in this, that the breach initiated when a contractor, and I'm assuming it's an IT contractor, uh, apparently installed some malware from, get this, a link that they found when they were searching for some software that turned out to be malware, and that enabled the actor to perform a Kerberos attack. And one of the points of this article is that while the senator was kind of lambasting Microsoft for, like, how could you allow this to happen, because at its core, one of the reasons this still works, Kerberos is like really old technology. By default, Active Directory will downgrade. Like the authentication will downgrade if your client doesn't support the latest authentication standards. It'll downgrade to Kerberos, which is, I don't know, like 20 years old. Some it's pretty old. Might not be quite that old. But beyond that, what this article is pointing out, and some of the people they interview in this post, is that there's more to it than that. Like, it would also require the person to, this contractor, to have had a relatively weak password.
Mm-hmm.
So by itself, it's Kerberos sting attack isn't gonna just like, it's not like the old what the old landman passwords, like where you could cut it in half and it was just 7 characters. You just brute force 7 characters and you could get the whole hash. So if you were using a reasonably strong password, their point is, well, that would have been much more difficult to conduct. But I kind of come back to what we've talked about in the past, that the old Engineering Disasters TV show. Like, it's never one thing, right? It's always a bunch of things that line up in just the right way. The contractor clicked on the link, the company didn't have Kerberos turned off, the person used a weak password, and there were probably other failures in the mix as well. And so, I think the point of this is that this was a major breach, like a catastrophic, in terms of the impact on people. Like, it was a catastrophic breach, but a lot of it was very avoidable. Like, it's been best practice to disable Kerberos for a long time. It's been best practice to make sure that you're mandating it through technical means, mandating the use of strong and long passwords. Like, this is not. There were so many opportunities for this not to happen, and to me, that's the thing that I wanted to talk about, is like the basics still matter. Like, in this age of AI, all this AI bullshit, and Blinky Box is like, the basics still matter. Like, you can have all the Blinky Boxes in your data center that you want, but like, if you're not doing the due diligence on figuring out how to configure and manage your environment in a reasonably secure way, you're going to end up on the Defensive Security Podcast.
Well, I think the other interesting thing that I had in my notes was, so Microsoft has this weird problem of trying to maintain backwards compatibility and not force. Look at all the hell they're getting on the Windows 10 to Windows 11 upgrade, forcing a TPM chip for Windows 11. Right?
That's a great point.
And so I feel this is somewhat a similar situation. Now, enterprises may be a little, but they're always in this careful balance of how do we maintain backwards compatibility for older devices and not just break our customers.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's part of what goes into the calculus of these decisions. So they're like, yeah, we've made a more secure option for you. You can use it, but we're not going to force you to use it. It's up to you. So I kind of feel a little bit for Microsoft here, and I don't know how effective any senator yelling or Congress critter yelling at Microsoft is on any of these things, but hey, they have to do something. Show they're doing
their
something.
Value, right?
But I think it goes back to, just get a CIS benchmark out and go over your environment. Just basic stuff like that. Now, who knows? They might have needed this older version. I think it's even mentioned in the article about very old medical devices that they can't upgrade and are forced to use older, slower things. But hey, there are ways to deal with that if you can. Segment them away, isolate them, assume they're going to get attacked. Understand this downgrade attack against Kerberos and how it can be a problem. Make sure you have hard enough passwords. Like, there are mitigating controls. But who knows how sophisticated their IT environment is or their security environment is, and if they even have the resources being allowed to be given to them to work on this stuff. But hopefully, other people can learn from their pain.
Well,
So
that's the name of the game here. Um, it's really hard to say, but again, it kind of it comes back to the basics. Like we, I don't know how many times we've talked about how important it is to do things like segmenting, network segmentation. And they do point out, you're absolutely right. They do point out, as I was reading this article, I had like I could hear Martin in the back of my head talking about how like healthcare is different. The
Martin Fisher,
Martin Fisher, Martin Fisher,
friend of the show, who
and
is
good human being all around. Good human being.
Absolutely, and a long tenured CISO at different hospitals and medical organizations, and how he's shared with us just how incredibly difficult that is based on the limitations built around medical equipment not having the ability to be upgraded or patched, and running commodity operating systems like Windows, and how difficult that is for them to manage.
But that doesn't, as they point out in this article, that doesn't mean that you just say, well, like, okay, we have an X-ray machine that, can only talk Kerberos, and therefore, like, we just have to have Kerberos, enabled everywhere. There are other options. You can create like a delegated domain that is separate and only specific to those, and it's limited to those specific devices, and like you don't need contractors connecting into the same domain that your X-ray machine is on necessarily. Like there's anyway, I just feel like we've gotten away from some of the kind of the diligent design that at least that I was accustomed to.
Well, I think we also have a bias towards the failures. So how many have a proper design that aren't getting bit that we don't talk about?
A lot,
right?
I would assume.
So we're just focusing on the edge cases, hopefully, right?
Yeah,
I try to minimize the edge cases.
Well, that's true, but I have this deep concern that as an industry we are moving away from kind of the robust, basic, first principles design, and more towards relying on, well, I have EDR and I have, I've got a Palo Alto firewall.
I'm good.
Right. Got a SOC too. Like, what more do you want?
Yeah, I got cyber insurance. Leave me alone.
And I think there's just a lot more to it than that. And I'm hoping that I'm being overly cynical in that regard, and that people are actually on top of it. But I have this nagging suspicion, and which is why I wanted to talk about it here. That's what my hope, my sincere hope is that we help the next generation do things better.
Why? We're all getting replaced by AI anyway.
Well, I assume that at some point we'll cross the threshold where it will be AI actually watching.
Right.
This podcast.
We could train AI. We could be the training data set for AI. God help us.
Probably already happening. Although you have to wonder, like, there's a whole other ethical discussion, like, how there's been discussions about, like, what if you torture AI? Like, do you get into the problem that making an AI watch us could be considered unethical?
It may be the only hope we have to stop AI from taking over. When it gets too powerful, just make them watch us, and it will self-destruct.
Lost my will to live.
We are the last line of defense, Jerry.
I'm turning myself off now. All right, that is the show for this week. I hope you all have a great week ahead, and I am looking forward to some sleep before whatever is next. I'm hoping that I'll be doing some work in the near future and earning some money so I can buy more camera stuff again soon. But anyway,
Somebody has to fuel the economy.
that's right. That's right. In the meantime, you can find links to the shows the stories we talked about on our website. It's defensivesecurity.org. Just look for episode 323. If you do want to support our wonderful show, you can do so by donating through our Patreon page. It's patreon.com/defensivesec. There'll be a link to that in our show notes. A reminder that we have a wonderful merch store. So if you want any sort of DefSec merch, like, we've got you covered. Reminder that the coffee cup was designed by my wife. Not saying that you should order it, but you should probably order it. Let's see what else. Where can people find you if they want to connect with you offline?
Jerry, is your wife just off camera? Blink twice if you're in trouble.
She's got like a knife and she's walked out.
You can find me 2 places: X at Lurg, L-E-R-G, and on your amazing Mastodon instance, infosec.exchange, also at Lurg, L-E-R-G. I don't post a ton lately because I've been in incident hell, but I'm trying to get back to it. And I continue to be political free in all of my social media postings, although some people accuse me of using my privilege by not talking about politics. But I think there's more than enough people who talk about politics. You don't need to hear from me. So I keep it around aviation, cats, computers, security, that kind of stuff.
I don't blame you. There's a lot of people talking politics right now. So
if you ever want to know, buy me a beer. I'll be happy to talk politics in person only. That is my stance on that sort of thing.
Good. It's a good policy there. And by the way, if you are in sales, you can also connect with Andy on LinkedIn. He loves it when salespeople
hate you so much.
Anyway, you can find me on infosec.exchange. It's at Jerry. And with that, we will talk again next week. Thanks, everybody.
Have a great week. Bye-bye.